Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where even your teacup had social expectations. Where a crooked pinky, an unpolished boot, or a slightly delayed curtsy could cause more drama than a royal scandal. The Victorian era, roughly 1837 to 1901, wasn't just about top hats and horse-drawn carriages. It was an entire choreography of manners, appearances, and unspoken rules. You're about to live it. For one long, breathless day. You'll eat politely, speak softly, and maybe, if you're lucky, not get judged by your neighbor's lorgnettes. You probably won't survive this level of etiquette. But don't worry, it's just pretend. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all are drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the faint scent of coal smoke and lavender soap. The sun, watery and pale through a lace curtain, tells you it's far too early for anyone to be this uncomfortable. But this is Victorian England. Comfort is suspicious. You sit upright, as any decent person would, trying not to wrinkle your nightclothes. Somewhere below, the servants are already lighting the fires. You can hear the muted thud of coal in the grates, and the soft metallic clatter of kettles being filled. The house has its own rhythm, one you're expected to dance to without question. Servants rise before dawn, move silently through the halls, and vanish before the family descends. You, the respectable resident, will never acknowledge their exhaustion. Not out of cruelty, but because that's simply how things are. The class divide is stitched into every bed sheet, every spoon. You're upper middle class, not nobility, but not among those who scrub floors either. You live in the delicate middle, where appearances matter most. When you step out of bed, you pause. Because even how you stand is a statement. Posture means everything. Shoulders back, chin modestly lowered, spine as straight as moral virtue. Somewhere, an etiquette manual reminds you that. A lady should appear as though a string from heaven draws her upward. You wonder if that string could also pull you back into bed. You dress, or rather, you're dressed. The maid helps lace your corset, tugging the strings with military precision. You inhale, she pulls, you exhale, she pulls again, and suddenly your lungs are ornamental. This is your morning armor, your social shield. Without it, you'd be indecent with it. You can barely breathe. Historians still argue whether tight lacing actually caused fainting, or if it was just fashionable theatre. But in this moment, your ribs are definitely in rehearsal for a tragedy. Once you're properly encased, the day can begin. Downstairs, breakfast is served in calculated silence. No one talks until the master of the house lifts his fork. A rule as rigid as the toast. The smell of kippers and black tea fills the air. You move your spoon clockwise, because anti-clockwise suggests rebellion. And rebellion is for poets, not for breakfast. A mainstream fact. Etiquette manuals in the Victorian age were bestsellers. Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, for instance, wasn't just a cookbook. It was a manifesto of morality disguised as recipes. It told you not only how to cook lamb, but when to correct your husband's conversational blunders. Us answer, never. As the meal continues, you realize that dining is a subtle performance. No slurping, no elbows, no joy. Just quiet dignity, and the occasional, pass the marmalade, please. The butter knife isn't for spreading, it's for judgment. You catch yourself wondering how anyone had time to invent the steam engine, while worrying about how to butter a crumpet correctly. After breakfast, you move to the drawing room, the stage for polite nothingness. You sit, you embroider, you pretend to read a moral novel, while secretly daydreaming about scandalous adventures that involve trousers and freedom. The room smells faintly of rosewater and restraint. A clock ticks loudly, reminding everyone that time passes. But not too quickly, please. You're not alone in this suffocating politeness. The entire neighborhood watches each other like hawks in lace collars. If Mrs. Pembroke sees your maid wearing your old shawl in public, the rumor will spread faster than ink in water. Respectability is your currency, and gossip is the tax. One wrong move, an unchaperoned walk, a laugh too loud, and your name could become a cautionary tale whispered over teacups. A quirky tidbit. Victorians were so obsessed with moral cleanliness that some households covered piano legs because bare limbs, even wooden ones, were indecent. You glance at your piano now and feel slightly judged by its carved ankles. The day drifts on in slow formality. The mail arrives, perhaps an invitation to a garden party or a charity bazaar. You read it carefully, searching for hidden social meanings. The host's choice of stationery alone can tell you everything about your social standing. Cream paper. Respectable pink paper. A little forward. Embossed gold edges. Probably royalty, or at least someone who thinks they are. You step outside briefly to inspect the garden, because appearances extend to hedges too. The air smells faintly of soot and lilacs, the two constant perfumes of the age. Carriages rattle down the street, wheels crunching over cobblestones. A newsboy shouts headlines about empire and invention. And you half listen, half rehearse your smile for the day ahead. You must look grateful for progress, even if progress just means tighter moral corsets and louder moral lectures. Still, you can't help admiring the world's peculiar beauty. The streets are lined with gas lamps, flickering even in daylight like cautious promises. The city hums, factories, horses, footsteps. The metallic rhythm of civilization in bloom. Somewhere, someone's inventing something miraculous, and yet your biggest challenge is making sure your gloves match your bonnet. By late morning, visitors arrive, calling hours. The ritualized version of social stalking. You sit in the parlor, poised like a porcelain doll, while acquaintances drop by to leave their calling cards. A proper lady never stays longer than 15 minutes, just enough time to exchange compliments and silently assess each other's dress quality. It's like social media, but with hats and teacups. As they leave, you notice your maid quietly tidying the room. You're reminded again that your grace relies on invisible labor, countless hands smoothing, scrubbing, and serving so you can glide through life as though born graceful. Historians still argue whether Victorian gentility was kindness or cruelty in disguise. You suspect it was both. The afternoon sun filters through the lace curtains, dust motes swirling like ghostly dancers. You sip tea, strong, bitter, perfect, and imagine how exhausting it must have been to be this proper, this endlessly watched. No wonder they fainted at parties. It wasn't the corsets. It was the pressure. You catch your reflection in a mirror framed by gilt leaves. The face looking back seems serene, composed, socially acceptable. But there's a flicker of rebellion in the eyes. A quiet thought that maybe, just maybe, you'd rather be anywhere else. Then the clock chimes noon. Time for the next ritual, the next performance, the next chance to behave correctly. But for now, as the sound echoes through the house, you close your eyes and breathe, as much as your corset allows. You've survived the morning. In Victorian England, that's practically an achievement. Outside, the carriages rattle on, the gaslights flicker in daylight, and the air smells faintly of progress and coal. You lean back, teacup balanced just so, posture immaculate, a model of grace in a world that demands nothing less. And as the clock ticks onward, you realize that in this society, perfection isn't an option. It's the only rule that matters. The morning light grows brighter, glinting off polished silver frames and glass, fronted cabinets filled with porcelain figurines. that look too fragile to exist in the real world. You finish your tea and rise carefully, because even standing up in the Victorian age has choreography. One smooth motion, no wobbling, no sighing, no adjusting your skirts too obviously. You glide, because respectable people do not move, they float. Somewhere downstairs, the maid clears away breakfast. You're not supposed to notice, but you do. You hear her soft footsteps, the faint clinking of china. There's an entire ecosystem beneath you. Cooks, scullery maids, errand boys, all turning the gears of this delicate household machine so the upper floors can appear effortlessly calm. It's like being royalty in a beehive, with every drone in perfect formation. Now comes what might be the most terrifying part of the day, getting properly dressed for morning appearances. You're technically already wearing a corset, chemise, and petticoat. But that's just the base layer. You still need a bodice, overskirt, jacket, gloves, hat, and possibly your will to live. Fashion in the Victorian world is less about expression and more about social compliance. The more uncomfortable you are, the more moral you appear. A mainstream historical fact. Queen Victoria herself set much of this standard. Her fondness for modest gowns, high necklines, and subdued colours filtered through every class. By the 1850s, to show too much wrist was practically indecent. A strange thought in a world soon to invent the light bulb. Your maid, patient but wordless, helps you step into layer after layer of decorum. The bodice squeezes, the skirt swishes, the bustle bulges awkwardly behind you like a personal shelf. You can't bend properly, so you simply learn not to. The smell of starch, soap, and faint lavender oil fills the room. By the time you're done, you look perfect. You also can't feel your ribs. You glance at yourself in the mirror, the portrait of respectability. The reflection stares back with gentle pride, a woman designed for observation, not participation. Historians still argue whether Victorian women found empowerment in this ritual of control, or if they merely survived it. You suspect it's a bit of both. Once dressed, you prepare to receive callers. A phrase that sounds pleasant until you realize it's basically social performance under surveillance. Visitors drop in unannounced. Neighbors, acquaintances, distant relatives, each expecting polite conversation and perfect posture. There's even a specific receiving chair in your parlor, angled just right so your silhouette appears flattering and your spine appears morally aligned. Your maid announces Mrs. Pembroke and her daughter Clara. You brace yourself. Mrs. Pembroke has opinions, mostly about other people. You greet her with a smile measured to exactly 60% warmth, 40% restraint. Clara, demure and dull, like curtsies. You all pretend to enjoy each other's company. The conversation dances between harmless topics: weather, flowers, and the scandalous new fashion of bicycling. You nod politely as Mrs. Pembroke insists that cycling ruins a woman's figure, which is ironic, considering corsets have already done most of that work. You sip your tea, make a delicate comment about hydrangeas, and laugh at precisely the right volume. A quirky tidbit: some etiquette books warned women never to laugh loudly, because it might make men uncomfortable. You imagine generations of women developing quiet, ladylike giggles like stealth weapons. After 15 minutes, the visit concludes, because lingering is gotch. Mrs. Pembroke leaves her calling card on your silver tray, embossed and smelling faintly of perfume. You'll return the visit within a week, or risk social extinction. It's like maintaining friendships through paperwork. With the callers gone, you exhale slightly. The drawing room, all chintz and faded roses, feels alive again. Dust motes drift in sunlight, slow and lazy. For a moment, you imagine this life from a servant's point of view. Endless polishing, buttoning, sweeping. A world where elegance is measured by someone else's exhaustion. Outside, the neighborhood hums with quiet competition. Horses clatter down cobbled lanes, postboys deliver envelopes sealed with wax. Each letter, each visit, each public smile builds the scaffolding of your reputation. It's exhausting to realize that in this world, your virtue is only as sturdy as the paper it's written on. You pause by the window. Across the street, a milkmaid passes. Her skirt simple, her pace unhurried. She hums a tune, probably unaware that the fine ladies behind lace curtains envy her freedom. There's an invisible fence between you, built from etiquette, money, and fear of judgment. You press your gloved hand to the glass, almost as if you could touch the life beyond it. Then, from somewhere upstairs, the clock strikes 11. Time to prepare for morning calls. This means you, dressed to suffocate, must now go visit others and pretend to enjoy it. The maid brings your parasol, a delicate lace umbrella that offers shade but no real relief. You nod your thanks, though technically, you're not supposed to thank servants too warmly. It blurs the social line. Outside, the air smells faintly of coal smoke and horse manure, the perfume of progress. The street is alive with carriages and chatter. You nod at acquaintances as you pass, each greeting a mini duel of politeness. Every good morning must sound pleasant, but not too eager, sincere but not too familiar. It's social chess, played with bonnets and smiles. Your first stop is the Everett's townhouse, where rumour says Mrs. Everett's new maid once worked for a duchess. This is the sort of fact that can make or break social standing. You sit for tea, listen to harmless gossip about someone's niece marrying beneath her station, and contribute one carefully measured laugh. Historians still argue whether Victorians genuinely believed in all this civility, or if it was simply fear wrapped in satin. After an hour of practiced small talk, you're starting to think it's both. Fear of being seen as uncivilized, fear of being left out. It's a fragile empire built on table manners. By the time you return home, you're exhausted from politeness. The maid removes your gloves and hat. You realize that your entire morning has been a performance, your every gesture choreographed by unwritten rules. You long to slouch, to laugh loudly, to breathe fully. But propriety doesn't rest. A small comfort, you sneak into the kitchen under the pretense of checking the tea stock. The servants freeze, unsure if they're being inspected. You smile awkwardly, then steal a biscuit from the counter. It's still warm. You take a bite, soft and sweet, and for one brief, glorious second, you feel human again. The cook pretends not to see. She's been here long enough to know that even the well-bred need crumbs of rebellion. You retreat upstairs before anyone can notice your moment of imperfection. In your room, sunlight fades into a dim, golden haze. You remove your gloves, unpin your hair, and for a heartbeat, let your shoulders drop. It's quiet. The kind of quiet that hums, like the pause between breaths. You sit by the window again, watching life pass by. Carriages, children, vendors shouting prices for flowers you're not supposed to buy yourself. Everything looks orderly, civilized, correct. And yet beneath it all, you can feel the tension. The effort it takes to hold this fragile perfection together. Evening will come soon, bringing more rules, more rituals, more polite smiles. But for now, you let the world drift by, heavy with perfume and pretense. And as you sit there, corset whispering against your ribs, you realize something simple but profound. Living under Victorian social rules isn't about virtue or elegance. It's about survival, the quiet art of looking perfect while barely breathing. Downstairs, the clock strikes noon again, its chime echoing through polished halls and down the servant stairs into the humming world below. You're not supposed to hear that echo, of course, but you do. It ripples through the stillness, like a reminder that life happens behind the curtains too. The household seems to sigh, each servant moving with quiet purpose, performing a dance that's as strict as any waltz in a ballroom. Lunch, or as the polite society insists on calling it, luncheon, approaches. This isn't the hearty laughter-filled meal of modern homes. It's a subdued intermission in the theatre of respectability. You must appear calm, controlled, and as light-hearted as though the corset squeezing your lungs were just a pleasant hug from society itself. The footman announces it's ready. You glide into the dining room, that grand chamber of rules and quiet judgments. It smells faintly of polish and roast beef, though you'll pretend not to notice the food until it's served to you. The table is already set, silver utensils shining, glasses aligned with military precision, napkins folded like origami of obedience. The arrangement itself tells a story: who sits where, who carves the roast, who gets the best wine. Everything about this meal broadcasts social order louder than any sermon. A mainstream historical fact in Victorian households: seating arrangements were strategic. Guests were placed by rank and gender, balancing conversation and hierarchy like a delicate scale. The host might spend hours deciding who sits beside whom. One misplacement could spark gossip that lasted weeks. You take your seat, right hand of the host, not too close to seem presumptuous, not too far to seem unimportant. The master of the house, your husband, lifts his fork first. Only then do you move. The servants glide silently around the table, refilling glasses, changing plates, anticipating needs before you can voice them. You marvel at how they appear invisible and indispensable at once. "Pass the salt, my dear," your husband says. You do so, making sure your wrist bends delicately. A simple gesture, but one that, if fumbled, could invite mockery. You can't help wondering what would happen if you simply threw the salt instead. Not out of malice, just to see what chaos looks like in a place like this. You restrain yourself. Barely. Conversation at table is an art form. The topics must be light, cultured, and completely non-controversial. No politics, no religion, and certainly no mention of bodily functions. You discuss art, literature, and the weather. The Victorian holy trinity of safe topics. Someone mentions Charles Dickens, and you nod knowingly, though you've only managed a few chapters of Bleak House before sleep claimed you. Historians still argue whether Victorians truly loved literature or simply loved the idea of appearing well. Read. Judging by how often they quoted authors incorrectly, you suspect the latter. A quirky tidbit. Some etiquette books advised men not to compliment a woman's beauty at the table, as it might suggest bodily awareness. You glance at the gentleman across from you, who nervously praises your embroidery instead. How romantic. The servants move like ghosts, clearing plates without sound. The pudding arrives, sweet, rich, perfumed with nutmeg and moral superiority. You take 2 small bites, because indulgence is dangerous. The host laughs politely at a mild anecdote about a neighbor's goose escaping its pen. Everyone smiles, because laughter, even mild, keeps up appearances. After the final spoonful, the ladies rise first, as is tradition, leaving the gentlemen to their cigars and brandy. You step into the drawing room again, where a low fire burns beneath a marble mantel. The air smells faintly of roses and restraint. You and the other ladies perch on the edge of settees, chatting softly. Someone brings up charity work, the fashionable pastime of doing good, but politely. The talk shifts to poorhouses and orphanages, each woman nodding in sympathy while fingering silk gloves worth more than an entire family's yearly income. You join in, describing how you once donated blankets to the local church. You omit the part where you had the maid deliver them. The conversation drifts toward gossip. The tone remains angelic, but the words sharpen. Someone mentions that Mrs. Pembroke's daughter was seen speaking too long with a stable boy, a scandal in the making. You feign surprise, though you'd already heard it this morning. Gossip, after all, travels faster than the train to Liverpool. The air feels heavy, thick with perfume and secrets. You take another sip of tea, its bitterness grounding you. The ritual of civility feels endless, yet you can't look away. Everyone plays the game, because not playing means social death. You glance at the piano in the corner, that emblem of cultured femininity. You're expected to play, of course. So you do. Your fingers move stiffly over ivory keys, performing a piece you've practiced for years. The notes flutter through the air like polite sighs. You finish, bow slightly, and receive the required applause. Music fades. Conversation resumes. Time moves in its delicate, suffocating circle. Late afternoon brings the arrival of post. Envelopes sealed in wax, their contents as telling as fingerprints. One letter bears an unfamiliar crest. It's from your cousin in London, full of stories about the city's bustling life, carriages, theatres, electric lamps. The word electric feels thrilling, almost indecent. You imagine a world lit by invisible power, not candles and propriety. Historians still debate whether Victorians were more excited or terrified by new technologies. The evidence suggests both. Fascination mixed with a deep suspicion that progress might ruin the world. You, reading this letter by dim gaslight, feel the same uneasy thrill. The day begins to wane. Outside, the air darkens, the smell of soot deepens. Inside, servants prepare for evening, fires stoked, lamps trimmed, drapes drawn. You're ushered upstairs to change into your afternoon dress, which looks remarkably like your morning dress, except more expensive and less breathable. Your maid tightens the corset again, though you could swear it hasn't loosened all day. "There?" she says softly, tying the final bow. Her eyes flicker with quiet pity. You want to tell her she's lucky. That freedom must feel lighter than lace. But you stop. Words like that don't belong in this house. For a moment, you stand still, hands resting on polished wood, the gaslight flickering against the mirror. You feel caught between worlds. The servant's quiet reality and the mistress's gilded cage. Somewhere below, the clatter of dishes signals the servant's supper. Plain food, eaten quickly, without silver spoons or judgment. You envy them. A knock at the door. Your husband, reminding you of the evening's plans. You're attending a small dinner party at the Thompsons' house, just across town. You force a smile, say you'll be ready shortly. When he leaves, you stare out the window. The street lamps glowing like stars trapped in glass. The city stretches endlessly, full of lives following the same clockwork rhythm. All trying to appear respectable, all terrified of falling out of step. As you descend the staircase once more, skirt rustling like the whisper of silk wings, you realize this: every creak, every breath, every glance in this world has a rule. To live in Victorian society is to balance on a knife, edge of grace and judgment. And yet, there's beauty in it too. The calm of order, the shared illusion that politeness can hold chaos at bay. You smile, faintly, as the carriage door opens and the night air hits your face. Somewhere beyond the lamplight, life hums. Raw, loud, unrefined. But for now, you belong to the quiet world of manners, candlelight, and carefully measured breaths. And as the wheels roll forward into the dark, you think, not for the first time, that survival here is an art form. And you, corseted and composed, are learning to master it. The carriage wheels clatter over cobblestones as you travel through the dimming streets. Gas lamps glow like fireflies caught in glass, and the scent of wet earth and horse sweat drifts in through the window. You hold your parasol on your lap like a shield. Even in the shadows, you must look composed. It's astonishing how much effort goes into being seen doing nothing at all. The streets hum with life. Vendors close their stalls. Children chase each other through narrow lanes, and gentlemen tip their hats to passing ladies. Every movement, every glance, feels choreographed by invisible rules, the great Victorian ballet of respectability. And yet beneath the surface, there's noise, laughter, danger, life. You wonder what it might feel like to be one of those children. Loud, dirty, and free. But the carriage stops before you can finish the thought. The Thompsons' townhouse looms tall and symmetrical, lit from within by soft amber light. A butler greets you at the door with the solemn dignity of a man guarding a sacred temple. You step inside, greeted by the faint scent of violets and roast pheasant, the perfume of wealth and propriety. Your hostess, Mrs. Thompson, sweeps forward with an eager smile and a gown that could fund a small country. "My dear," she says. "So glad you could come." Her tone is warm, but her eyes are calculating, scanning your dress, your posture, the faint delay before your curtsy. You pass the test, apparently. She turns to the next guest. A servant takes your wrap. You're ushered into the drawing room, where other guests are already gathered like chess pieces on a velvet board. A gentleman recites a line from Tennyson. Someone else laughs politely, and in one corner, a young woman pretends to examine a fern. The air smells of candle wax, wine, and ambition, a mainstream historical fact. In the Victorian era, social gatherings were less about pleasure and more about power. Every dinner invitation, every seating arrangement, was a strategic move in a vast, genteel game of alliances and reputation. Who you dined with could determine who married your daughter, who offered your husband a business contract, or who whispered about your family at church. Mrs. Thompson calls for everyone's attention. Dinner is served, she declares, and a subtle current moves through the room as guests pair off for the procession. You're escorted by a tall, slightly nervous gentleman, a minor lord with a passion for railway investments, and judging by his expression, a mortal fear of conversation. You take his arm and glide into the dining room, where a chandelier drips crystal light over a table that gleams like polished marble. Silverware glints in perfect rows, and each place setting bears a folded card with delicate calligraphy. You find your name beside a floral arrangement that smells faintly of lilies. The flower of virtue, or so society insists. You sit. The air hums with polite expectation. The first course arrives, turtle soup, steaming and golden, served in delicate porcelain bowls. You lift your spoon with practiced precision, stirring clockwise. The conversation flows as predictably as the soup, light, harmless, and utterly rehearsed. Someone mentions the Queen's latest speech. Someone else laments the decline of morals among the working class. You nod in rhythm, offering a mild comment here and there, careful not to sound opinionated. Historians still argue whether these social rituals created genuine community or merely concealed loneliness behind layers of etiquette. You, tasting faint traces of sherry in your soup, suspect both. There's comfort in structure, yes, but there's also suffocation. Your dinner partner clears his throat. "Marvellous weather," he says. "Quite consistent." You smile politely, because that's what's expected. Inside, you're screaming, but softly, of course. Between courses, the servants sweep in with quiet efficiency, removing dishes like magicians. Their silence is unnerving, the kind that makes you hyper, aware of your every breath. A single dropped fork could feel like treason. A quirky tidbit. Some upper-class hostesses hired etiquette coaches for their servants, ensuring they could move silently enough to impress guests. One manual even suggested practicing with bells tied to their ankles. If the bells rang, they weren't ready for service. The next course arrives. Roast pheasant with bread sauce and green peas arranged in a perfect ring. You wonder if anyone actually enjoys eating this way. Slow, deliberate, and half-starved by politeness. Across the table, Mrs. Pembroke whispers to her husband, her face glowing with the satisfaction of being seen at the right table with the right people. The meal stretches on. Salmon, lamb pudding, fruit. Conversation meanders through art, poetry, and moral improvement. The gentlemen quote Shakespeare badly, the ladies feign fascination. You listen half present, half drifting. The chandelier light flickers slightly, and for a moment, you imagine the gas flame as a tiny rebellion, a restless spirit trapped in glass, flicking its tongue at propriety. At last, dessert arrives. Candied fruits and syllabub, arranged like small trophies. The host rises to toast Her Majesty. Glasses clink, and everyone murmurs, "God save the Queen," in a tone that suggests mild digestion rather than patriotism. When the ladies withdraw, you find yourself once again in a drawing room. This one smaller, warmer, scented with rosewater and gossip. Mrs. Thompson leads the conversation toward household matters. "Did you hear?" she says. "That Lady Briar refuses to use her new bathtub. She says it's unnatural to sit in water indoors." Laughter ripples, soft and scandalized. You smile faintly, but your mind drifts. Bathing indoors. The idea does sound strange, but tempting. Warm water, privacy, the rare luxury of being unobserved. You imagine the steam, the silence, the absence of corset strings. For a fleeting second, you envy Lady Briar's rebellion. Historians still debate whether Victorian women were as prudish as stereotypes suggest. Diaries and letters hint that many were quietly witty, even bold, trapped by decorum, but armed with sharp minds and sharper humor. You like to think you would have been one of them. The men rejoin you, smelling of tobacco and brandy. The conversation turns livelier, though still confined by invisible boundaries. Someone plays the piano, another sings. You join in softly, voice blending with the others in a fragile harmony. The melody swells, fills the room, and for a brief, shimmering moment, everyone forgets to pretend. Then the song ends, and reality snaps back like a tightened corset. The guests begin to leave, each departure marked by bows and polite laughter. You thank the hostess, compliment the food, and retrieve your wrap. Outside, the night is cool and damp, the city shrouded in mist. The carriage door closes with a soft click. You lean back against the seat, exhaling for what feels like the first time all evening. The rhythm of the wheels soothes you. Click, clack, click, like a metronome for your thoughts. You think about how much energy this life demands, how every smile is weighed, every silence judged. And yet, you also feel the strange comfort of belonging to a perfectly ordered world. You watch the lamps flicker past the window, each one a small sun in the fog. Somewhere out there, people are laughing too loudly, living too freely. You envy them, but only for a moment. You know you'll return home, remove your gloves, and once again become the calm, graceful creature the world expects you to be. And as the carriage turns onto your street, the gaslight catches your reflection in the glass. Poised, polished, and ever so slightly tired. You smile at her, the woman who survives by playing the part. Because here, in the age of rules and ribbons, pretending isn't deceit. It's survival dressed in silk. Your maid, Clara, meets you at the door when you return home. Her eyes are heavy with the same exhaustion that clings to the edges of your own, but her smile is quick and dutiful. "Did the dinner go well, miss?" she asks, taking your shawl with careful fingers. "It went," you say simply, the most accurate reply for any social function. She nods, understanding more than propriety allows her to say, and follows you upstairs with a candle. Its light trembles over the walls as you climb, flickering across portraits of ancestors who gaze down with solemn, painted judgment. Each step feels like shedding a layer of pretense: the smile, the posture, the carefully measured tone. In your dressing room, Clara helps you out of your gown, unlacing, unbuttoning, unpinning. The process is long, delicate, and faintly humiliating. You think, not for the first time, how strange it is that a woman of status must be undressed like a doll to return to herself. Corset loosened, you inhale deeply, the first full breath in hours. The air feels heavy, perfumed with starch and faint candle smoke. You sit before the mirror, studying your reflection in the wavering light. Beneath the powder, your skin looks tired, almost translucent. A ghost in silk. Clara begins brushing your hair. Long, rhythmic strokes that hush your thoughts. The sound of bristles through strands is soft as rain. The city was loud tonight, she murmurs after a while. I heard shouting from the docks. You glance at her reflection. Another protest. She nods. Something about wages. They say the factory men are working 16 hours a day now. You don't know what to say. The papers call those workers unruly, ungrateful. But you wonder what it must feel like to have a life that doesn't require pretending every hour you're awake. Freedom has different shapes, you suppose. For some, it's time. For others, it's truth. When Clara leaves, you extinguish the candle and sit for a moment in the dark. The city hums outside. Faint wheels on stone, distant laughter, a dog barking somewhere beyond the fog. You think about the dinner table, the endless talk of virtue and progress. Then you think about the men at the docks, shouting for a fair day's pay. Both, you realize, are fighting for survival. Only the costumes differ. You slip into bed. The sheets are cool and stiff, the pillow scented faintly with lavender. You close your eyes, and the room blurs into silence. Yet your mind drifts, past the walls, past the lamps, out into the midnight streets. You imagine following the sound of voices, through alleys and smoke, down to the river where the water reflects 1,000 trembling lights. There, beneath the bridges, you can almost see them, silhouettes of men and women moving like shadows, their laughter rough and real. No gloves, no etiquette, just the raw sound of being alive. You think, for the briefest instant, that maybe you envy them more than anyone. Historical reflection. Victorian London was a world divided by invisible lines. On one side, candlelit parlours, lace gloves, and gentle manners. On the other, suit, labour, and the thunder of machines. Yet both worlds depended on each other. The glitter of the drawing rooms existed because of the smoke from the factories. The same city that sold porcelain teacups also sold human time, piece by piece. And in between those worlds were the maids, governesses, and shop girls. The silent gears that kept the great machine turning. Morning comes slowly. The light slips through lace curtains, soft and grey. You wake to the faint smell of coal smoke and the sound of a street organ playing somewhere far below. The melody is cheerful, but worn, like a smile practiced too many times. Clara knocks and enters with a tray. "Tea, miss," she says, setting it down beside your bed. The porcelain rattles faintly as she pours. You thank her, and she hesitates. The way servants do when they have something they want to say, but shouldn't. "Go on," you prompt gently. "It's just..." She glances at the window. "They say a woman spoke at the protest last night. A lady from the university. That catches your attention." "A lady?" "Yes, miss." She stood on a crate and told the men that every worker deserves rest. Even women. They say she quoted scripture too. Clara's eyes shine, half scandalized, half admiring. Imagine that, a woman speaking in public. You sip your tea slowly. "Imagine," you echo. Later that afternoon, curiosity gets the better of you. You send a note to your friend, Margaret, one of those rare women who reads newspapers and owns opinions. She writes back swiftly, in her hurried slant. Her name is Miss Eleanor Finch. She lectures on the rights of labourers and women. Dangerous talk, according to the men, but fascinating talk according to anyone with a brain. You smile. Dangerous and fascinating often walk hand in hand. Margaret's letter includes the time and place of Miss Finch's next lecture. In a rented hall off Fleet Street, open to anyone with courage and 2 pennies. You trace the ink with your fingertip. Fleet Street. Hardly proper. Definitely unchaperoned. Utterly unthinkable. And yet, when evening comes, you find yourself standing at your mirror again. Hands trembling slightly as you fasten a plain cloak instead of a silk one. You tuck your hair under a modest bonnet and slip out quietly through the servants' entrance. The air outside smells of rain and coal. A hansom cab rattles by, splashing through puddles. You walk instead, keeping to the shadows. For the first time in years, no one greets you by name. No one expects your curtsy or your composure. You are, briefly, invisible. And it feels glorious. Fleet Street is alive with motion. Men in caps, women with shawls, newsboys shouting headlines. You find the hall by following the sound of voices. Rough, eager, defiant. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of bodies and hope. Candles flicker against damp brick walls, and benches creak under the weight of the curious and the desperate alike. Then she appears. Eleanor Finch. Not tall, not glamorous, but radiant with conviction. Her voice rings through the room like a bell forged of iron and light. She speaks of fairness, of education, of women who work 16 hours and still cannot afford bread. She speaks of freedom, not as rebellion, but as dignity. And as you listen, you feel something stir in your chest, a warmth that isn't fear or shame, or even admiration. It's recognition. Because for the first time, someone is saying aloud what you've only dared to think behind lace and lamplight. When the crowd rises in applause, you find your hands joining them. Unthinking, you clap until your palms sting. And when the lights dim and the people spill into the night, you remain for a moment longer, breathless, uncertain, and quietly transformed. You had gone looking for a story. What you found was yourself. Historical note: women like Eleanor Finch and her real-life counterparts, Annie Besant, Millicent Fawcett, Josephine Butler, changed the landscape of Victorian Britain. They fought for workers' rights, education, and suffrage, often at great personal cost. Their courage planted seeds that would bloom long after gaslight faded from the streets. And though not all women could join them publicly, many, like you, listened, thought, and began to question quietly in parlours and drawing rooms. Change, after all, often begins not with a shout, but with a whisper over tea. The next morning, your reflection looks almost the same. The same neatly parted hair, the same modest smile, the same carefully arranged calm. Yet something beneath your skin hums differently, like a secret chord still vibrating long after the note has been struck. At breakfast, your mother talks about invitations, your father about markets and imports. You nod, pour the tea, and keep your thoughts neatly folded like the napkin in your lap. When the maid sets down the toast, the silver clinks softly, a sound so ordinary it almost hides the fact that the world feels newly alive. You excuse yourself early, citing a headache. Your mother barely looks up, but Clara notices. She always does. "Out again, miss," she whispers later, helping you into your plainest coat. You meet her eyes in the mirror. "Just a walk," you say. "Of course," she replies, though the corner of her mouth curls like she knows it's not quite true. Fleet Street again. But this time, you're not just a curious stranger slipping into a crowd. You've come early, before the lecture. Because Eleanor Finch had said something last time that caught your heart and refused to let go. Change begins when polite people stop pretending they are comfortable. And for the first time, you understand what she meant. The hall smells of damp plaster and candle wax. You help place benches, light wicks, arrange the pamphlets stacked on a table near the door. Each one bears the title on the rights of the working woman. The print is uneven, the paper coarse, but it feels like holding fire in your hands. As the room fills, Eleanor moves through the crowd with the calm certainty of someone who no longer asks permission to exist. She catches your gaze and smiles faintly. "Back again," she says when she reaches you. "Yes, you manage. I wanted to help." "Good," she says, simply. Help is a kind of courage. That night, you don't just listen, you work. You collect coins in a tin, pass out leaflets, even help calm an older man who insists that women have no place in such talk. Eleanor thanks you afterward. Her eyes are tired, but warm. Will you come again? You nod, though part of you already knows that this isn't something you can simply attend anymore. Days pass. Weeks. You find reasons to go out. Errands, charitable visits, vague mentions of the orphanage. Your mother praises your new sense of duty, never realizing it's political rather than pious. You begin to see the city differently now. Not as a painting of carriages and gas lamps, but as a breathing body of thousands, each with their own hunger and hope. You notice the chimney sweepers coughing in alleys, the shop girls who hurry through rain with their skirts soaked to the knees, the clerks who eat standing up because their lunch break is too short to sit. You even notice the small rebellions within your own class. A widow who refuses to wear mourning black beyond a month. A writer who signs her stories with her real name instead of initials. A servant who reads by candlelight after her duties. Tiny cracks forming in the marble surface of respectability. One evening, after a particularly fiery lecture, Eleanor invites you and a few others to tea in her modest apartment. You sit crowded around a small wooden table. Women from all walks of life. A tailor's daughter, a schoolteacher, even a nurse from Whitechapel. The tea is weak, the bread stale, but the conversation burns brighter than any ballroom chandelier. We talk, Eleanor says softly, because silence was the first rule they taught us. The others nod. You realize you're surrounded by people who have chosen discomfort and found freedom in it. Someone laughs. Someone else quotes a banned pamphlet. You find yourself speaking, really speaking, for the first time in your life. And though you know that if your father ever discovered this, his fury would be biblical, you feel lighter than you have in years. Historical fact, in real Victorian society, reform meetings like this one were often disguised as charitable discussions to avoid police scrutiny. Women who gathered to talk about labour, suffrage, or morality risked social exile, and sometimes literal arrest. Quirky tidbit. Some meetings even served watered down tea as a symbolic protest, a joke about how weak women were supposed to be. You can imagine the laughter as each cup clinked. Ongoing debate. Historians still argue whether the suffrage movement grew from these humble tea gatherings, or whether it was the factories, where women first earned wages, that lit the fuse of change. Either way, the revolution began quietly, over biscuits, whispers, and courage that refused to stay seated. Weeks turn into months. You write small essays now, unsigned, of course, printed in cheap pamphlets by a sympathetic printer on the South Bank. You argue that education should be available to girls of all classes, that moral virtue shouldn't depend on income, that perhaps society would not collapse if a woman were allowed to think aloud. You send them to Eleanor, who sometimes adds a note of encouragement in her looping script. Good work. Don't soften the truth. At night, back in your room, you hide the pamphlets beneath your mattress. You imagine them floating across London like sparks, landing in someone else's hands, lighting some small corner of thought. And then you attend another dinner. Another dizzying waltz of manners and pretense. The men speak of railways and profit. The women murmur about fabrics and weather. You nod and smile and pour tea. But now, when someone says, "It's improper for women to speak in public," your fingers twitch slightly around your cup. You think of Eleanor's calm defiance, the gleam of lamplight on her hair, as she spoke to a crowd unafraid. You want to laugh, or maybe shout. But instead, you lift your chin, smile faintly, and say, improper things have a way of becoming respectable once men decide they like them. The silence that follows is exquisite. Afterward, your father calls you into his study. The air smells of tobacco and authority. You've been Different lately, he says. More outspoken. It's unbecoming. You stand straighter. Is it? He frowns. You do well to remember your place. My dear, you almost answer. Almost tell him that you're finally finding it. But instead, you curtsy and retreat, feeling your pulse drum in your ears. That night, you lie awake listening to the rain tap the window. You think of Clara asleep in the servants' quarters, of Eleanor speaking to strangers by candlelight, of the countless women who carry their courage quietly because they must. You think, if the world is a dinner table, perhaps it's time someone rearranged the seating. Weeks later, another meeting. This one is crowded and tense. Eleanor has been warned. The authorities are watching. Some of her pamphlets have been confiscated. There are whispers that her lectures will be banned. Still, she stands tall at the front of the room, speaking with that same serene fire. They call us disobedient, she says, but obedience has never changed a thing worth keeping. The crowd murmurs approval. Someone begins to clap. Someone else cheers. And then, a crash. The door bursts open. A policeman shouts, "By order of the magistrate, this gathering is unlawful." The room erupts. People scatter. Candles topple. Papers fly. You grab Eleanor's arm, but she shakes her head. "Go," she urges. "They'll take you too." You hesitate. Then you run. Out into the rain. Down the alley, heart hammering. The cobblestones gleam slick underfoot, and the gaslights blur through the mist. Behind you, boots pound the pavement. A whistle pierces the night. You duck into a side street, breath ragged, and lean against a wall. For a long moment, you simply listen to the sound of your own pulse. Proof that you're still here, still free. When you finally return home, drenched and shaking, Clara opens the door silently. She says nothing, just takes your coat and wraps you in a blanket. You meet her eyes. She doesn't ask. She doesn't need to. You whisper, "They arrested her." Clara's lips press tight. Then, quietly, she says, "Then you'll have to keep going for her, won't you?" And for the first time, you see her not as a servant, but as an ally. You nod. "Yes, I suppose I will." The next morning, the papers call it a disturbance, a scandal. They describe Eleanor as a woman of questionable influence. But tucked within the outrage, there's a sentence that makes your heart catch. She was applauded by many before her arrest. Applauded. It's a small word, but it means others were listening. And maybe, just maybe, they still are. The days after Eleanor's arrest pass like a fogged mirror, everything familiar, but blurred at the edges. The house continues its rituals, bells ringing, coal being brought in, silver polished to a blinding shine. Your mother complains about the weather. Your father reads the Times. On the surface, nothing has changed. And yet, beneath the lace and wallpaper, something hums. Conversations pause when the servants pass. The post arrives a little later than usual. Clara keeps glancing at you with that quiet question in her eyes. What now? You pour tea in the morning room, the thin china clicking softly on saucers. Your father folds his newspaper with a frown. This woman, Finch, he mutters, has caused quite a stir. Disgraceful. You keep your tone mild. Disgraceful that she spoke, or disgraceful that people listened. His eyes narrow. Both. You smile faintly, pretending to admire the pattern on the teapot. I see. He returns to his paper, muttering something about the decline of proper manners. You resist the urge to tell him that manners are the armor of people too afraid to fight with truth. Later that afternoon, you find yourself walking again, aimless on the surface, purposeful underneath. The city smells of smoke and damp wool. A light drizzle falls. Turning everything a shade grayer, you stop at a small bookshop off Chancery Lane, one of those cramped, dusty places that seem to exist outside of time. The bell above the door jingles softly as you enter. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of old paper and ink. A man behind the counter looks up from his ledger. He has ink, stained fingers, and a face that looks perpetually unimpressed. "Looking for anything particular, miss?" You hesitate, then lower your voice. "Do you carry pamphlets? The kind not advertised?" He studies you for a long moment, then slides open a drawer beneath the counter and produces a slim stack bound in rough twine. The top one reads, "The Rights of the Working Woman." Your breath catches. "She's in prison, you know," the man says. But her words are still walking. You buy 3 copies, slip them into your reticule, and step back into the rain. That evening, you find Clara polishing the banister. She looks up as you approach. "You shouldn't be out so late," she says softly. You glance around, then hand her one of the pamphlets. "Read this when you can." She wipes her hands on her apron before taking it. Her brow furrows as she scans the cover. "Is it about her?" "It's about all of us," you say. Clara nods slowly. "Then I'll read it twice. Historical fact. Pamphlets like The Rights of the Working Woman circulated widely despite censorship. Authorities often seized them, but printers simply moved, printed at night, and distributed through sympathetic servants or shopkeepers. The written word, it turns out, was harder to silence than the spoken one." Quirky tidbit. Victorians were so fond of pamphlets that even fiction writers published serialized manifestos in them. One famous leaflet, titled "On the Proper Shape of One's Umbrella," sold thousands of copies in 1855. Society loved its rules, even when it pretended to break them. Scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the pamphlet culture was truly revolutionary or merely fashionable rebellion for the upper classes. Did it change minds? Or just make the well-bred feel daring for an afternoon? In the following weeks, you notice something subtle but unmistakable. At your mother's afternoon tea, one of the guests, Mrs. Harcourt, who usually speaks only of embroidery and opera, mentions Eleanor Finch by name. A pity about her. She sighs, stirring her tea. Still, one must admire a woman who refuses to faint when men shout. A few others nod. Someone else whispers. They say she taught factory girls to read. You hide your smile behind your cup. Gossip, once a weapon of conformity, begins to turn its blade the other way. The same lips that once condemned are now flirting with curiosity. That's how revolutions begin. Not with gunfire, but with tea that grows suddenly bolder. At night, you start hosting literary circles. In your parlor, a few friends from the neighborhood attend. Women with restless eyes and polite reputations. You read from novels first, then drift, carefully, into essays and letters. One evening, you read aloud a line from Eleanor's pamphlet. A society that silences its women builds its own deafness. The room falls quiet. The fire crackles softly. You can feel their thoughts turning. Finally, Mrs. Harcourt speaks. She's right, you know. We're all half asleep. Someone laughs, not mockingly, but with recognition. Someone else says, "Maybe it's time we wake up." You don't say it aloud, but you think it we already have. Rumors of Eleanor's release come a month later. You hear it from a cab driver, of all people, his accent thick, his grin toothy. "The Finch lady's out," he says as he helps you into the carriage. "Didn't stay down long, that one." Straight back to talking to. Your heart leaps. Is she giving another lecture? He winks. Tomorrow night. Same hall. She don't scare easy. When you arrive, the crowd is twice as large as before. Men, women, students, even a few journalists pretending to take notes on urban morality. Eleanor looks thinner, her face lined, but her voice. Oh, her voice is steady as iron. "They thought prison would silence me," she says. "But all it did was make me louder." The crowd roars. You feel the floor vibrate beneath your boots. Afterward, she finds you in the throng. "You came. I never stopped. You answer. She smiles. Then it worked. That night, as you walk home through the mist, you realize that London itself feels different. The fog doesn't just hide. It hums, alive with whispers. Street lamps gleam like watchful eyes. The air tastes like rain and revolution. You pass a newsboy selling the Times and hear him call out headlines about a minister's scandal, a new railway, a mysterious comet. You smile faintly. History, you think, is always louder than the people writing it. Back home, you find Clara waiting with the kettle already boiling. She pours the tea, then says in a voice so soft you almost miss it. One of the maids downstairs asked if she could borrow that pamphlet after I finish. Said she wants to learn her letters first. You look up, heart swelling. She wants to learn to read. Clara nods. She said, she's tired of not knowing what the world's whispering about. You sit in silence for a long moment. The steam curls between you, gentle and Dursley. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimes midnight. Maybe change doesn't always need to shout. Maybe it just needs to pass quietly, from one pair of hands to another, like a cup of tea cooling slowly in the dark. Historical aside, by the late 19th century, literacy among British women rose dramatically, from less than 50% in 1840 to over 90% by 1900. Reading became both an act of leisure and quiet rebellion. Women devoured novels, essays, and forbidden philosophy. Some scholars even credit cheap, serial fiction with preparing the public mind for suffrage. So yes, the revolution sometimes wore lace cuffs and smelled faintly of Earl Grey. Weeks later, at another gathering, someone brings word that Parliament is debating education reform. The women in your circle cheer softly. Someone toasts with lukewarm tea. Clara brings in biscuits, pretending not to listen. But you see her mouth twitch upward when someone mentions that even servants might benefit from free schooling. For the first time in your life, you feel the world tilt, just a little, toward fairness. Not much, just enough to notice. You look around your parlor, full of candlelight and conspiratorial smiles, and think, if the Victorians could build an empire out of iron and tea, maybe you can build something smaller but stronger. A world where women are allowed to think without apology. It might take decades. It might take more arrests. But it's already begun. And you're no longer just living within the rules. You're quietly rewriting them. You wake to the quiet rustle of silk skirts brushing over the wooden floors, the faint scent of lavender water, and the gentle knock of a maid bringing hot water for your morning wash. You're not a gentleman this time. You're a Victorian woman. Or rather, you're what society calls a lady, though the definition depends entirely on who's watching you and how much lace you can afford. The morning light slants through lace curtains, revealing not just dust motes, but expectations so thick you could trip over them. You stretch, but carefully. Even your posture is policed. There's no slouching, no yawning, no sprawling like some relaxed creature of comfort. Victorian society believes a woman's body must speak modesty before she opens her mouth. Your spine is straight, your movements measured. You don't walk, you glide. And if you don't, there's always a friend or an aunt ready to remind you what a proper lady does. You slip into layers that feel like armor, linen chemise, petticoats, corset, bustle, skirt, bodice. Each item whispers rules into your ear. A glimpse of ankle could ruin a reputation. Too much laughter in public. Scandal. Too direct a gaze. Improper. Even your accessories have moral undertones. Modest jewelry for modest hearts. Black pearls for mourning. Lace gloves for purity. Somewhere under it all, you wonder if being comfortable is a sin. Victorian women are meant to embody the angel in the house. You exist to soothe, to nurture, to keep everyone else's chaos in check while appearing utterly serene. The poet Coventry Patmore popularized the phrase, describing the perfect wife as tender, self-sacrificing, and perpetually cheerful. Historians still argue whether this was a cultural aspiration or an emotional prison. Either way, it defined countless lives. And yet, beneath all the politeness, you can feel the quiet rebellion simmering. Women begin to read novels that men say are unsuitable. They exchange glances over sewing circles that mean far more than the stitches. They volunteer in hospitals. They write essays under pseudonyms. And they start to whisper about education, not for charm, but for freedom. One mainstream fact: in 1859, the first women's college at Cambridge, Girton College, was founded, though women couldn't actually earn degrees until decades later. The logic: education might overstimulate the female brain and harm fertility. That's right. Your intelligence was considered a medical condition. You could practically hear the collective eye roll echo through history. But let's say you're one of the respectable women. You attend afternoon teas, manage servants, arrange flowers, and speak softly about nothing of consequence. You avoid politics because that's for men. You never mention money, unless it's charity, and you never, ever mention bodily functions, childbirth, or heaven forbid, desire. Entire lives are built around not saying what everyone already knows. Still, even within these constraints, you learn to wield subtle power. You host gatherings where alliances form behind lace fans. You drop a comment about a certain gentleman's debts that changes who gets invited to the next ball. You might not vote, but you influence those who do. The parlor becomes your battlefield, gossip your artillery, charm your shield. In a lower-class household, though, the story is different. You rise before dawn, scrub until your hands crack, and serve meals you don't get to eat hot. There's no angel in the house here, just exhaustion. You might work as a maid for people who think politeness means not acknowledging your existence. You're expected to call your mistress ma'am, avert your eyes, and live invisibly. A slip of the tongue could cost you your position. And yet, the same social rules trickle down, diluted but potent. Even among the working poor, reputation matters. A woman seen drinking alone, walking unchaperoned, or speaking too boldly risks being labelled fallen. It's a word that turns you from person to problem instantly. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some etiquette manuals actually advised women not to eat bananas in public. Too suggestive, apparently. The same logic applied to licking ice cream cones. Victorians managed to turn snacks into scandal. You might be thinking this all sounds exhausting, and you'd be right. Every breath, every word, every stitch of fabric carries social meaning. Your handwriting reveals your virtue. Your choice of book can signal rebellion. Even the way you fold your hands says something about your class and morals. It's not just control, it's choreography. And while men preach propriety, many lead double lives. Brothels flourish. London's fog hides what polite society refuses to see. Women are taught that virtue is survival, even if it means surrender. But not all of them surrender. Some find loopholes. Widows, for instance, enjoy rare independence. Freed from husbands, they can own property, make decisions, and travel. They are both admired and feared, often viewed as dangerously free. You might become one of them someday, if only you survive childbirth, which claims 1 in every 100 mothers. Still, progress is creeping in. The suffragette movement brews in whispers. You overhear talk of women petitioning Parliament for voting rights, of campaigns against child labour, of nurses demanding respect for their profession. You sense the world shifting, just slightly, under all the lace and linen. Late in the evening, when you finally sit by the fire with your embroidery, you let your shoulders drop. For a moment, you breathe like yourself, not a symbol. Maybe you hum a tune that isn't respectable. Maybe you think of a letter you'll never send. Maybe you dream of a day when women won't need permission to simply exist. A candle guttering in its holder seems to echo your thoughts, burning bright, shrinking, but still alive. And if someone saw you now, they'd see just a woman sewing quietly by the fire. But you know better. You know that inside, a whole revolution is waiting for the right moment to stand up and stretch. The lace may be tight, but cracks are forming in the marble. You hear the sound of little boots scuffing down a hallway, followed by a stern voice saying, "Not another word!" And suddenly, you remember what it meant to grow up as a child in the Victorian world. You weren't quite a person yet, not in the way adults thought of themselves. You were a project. A miniature adult waiting to be shaped, corrected, and polished until you could behave properly. You sit now in a dim nursery filled with wooden toys, faded wallpaper, and the faint smell of chalk and boiled milk. The nanny, always called nurse, is the law here. Parents, if you're upper class, don't raise you directly. That's far too emotional, far too messy. They might peek in once a day to see if you've survived another round of moral instruction and cold porridge. Your mornings begin with the sound of bells, not alarm clocks, summoning bells. Breakfast is porridge, sometimes with sugar if you've been good. Always lukewarm because nurse lets it cool while scolding your brother. You eat with a straight back and closed mouth, and heaven help you if you spill. Cleanliness isn't just hygiene, it's morality. A clean face equals a clean soul. Victorian adults truly believe that children are born wild and must be tamed. To spare the rod is to spoil the child. That's not metaphor, it's daily practice. Canes, rulers, switches, even the occasional lecture about eternal damnation are considered loving corrections. You're told it's for your own good, and you believe it because what else can you do? A mainstream historical fact. The British Education Act of 1870 made elementary schooling compulsory for children aged 5 to 10. But discipline was so strict that some preferred factory work to classrooms. Teachers carried canes, and writing the wrong letter could mean bruised knuckles. Literacy was spreading, yes, but so was fear. If you're from a wealthy family, your childhood looks different, but not freer. You're dressed like a tiny adult in frilly clothes and taught French, piano, needlework, and how to smile without showing teeth. Your future is planned before your first tooth falls out, finishing school, debut season, marriage, respectability. Your brother, meanwhile, is sent to Eton or Harrow to be hardened into a gentleman. He returns with Latin, rugby scars, and a sense of entitlement that could power an empire. And if you're poor, childhood barely exists. You work, maybe in a factory, maybe as a chimney sweep. You're small, which means you fit into spaces adults can't. You climb through soot-choked chimneys, scraping your knees raw. Or you spend 12 hours a day picking threads in a textile mill. You cough black dust and sleep where you can. You're told to be grateful for a penny's wage. Charles Dickens, of course, noticed all of this. He turned those grim realities into stories. Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Hard Times. And through fiction, he held a mirror up to the hypocrisy of an age that worshipped innocence while destroying it. Historians still argue whether Dickens's novels actually changed laws or just made readers feel better about pitying the poor from a distance. You glance over at the toy box. Inside are lead soldiers' rag dolls and picture books with stern moral tales. The disobedient girl who burned her fingers. The boy who lied and was eaten by wolves. Yes, bedtime stories were basically anxiety training. Even fairy tales came with sermons. No Disney endings here, just moral terror with a rhyming verse. A quirky tidbit. Some Victorian parents hired photographers to take post-mortem portraits of their dead children, posing them as if they were sleeping or sitting with siblings. It sounds macabre now, but to them, it was a last attempt to preserve innocence in a world that gave children so little of it in life. Still, there were moments of joy. a skipping rope in the street, a Christmas pudding carried flaming to the table, a secret game of marbles played behind the coal shed. You, as a child, learn to carve happiness out of strictness. Because if you wait for permission, you'll never have any. You look out the nursery window and see the neighborhood boys playing cricket in the lane. Girls, of course, aren't supposed to join. You're expected to sit and embroider quietly, shaping your manners rather than muscles. You sneak a look at the boys anyway, envying their freedom to get dirty. One day, you might go to a children's party, a terrifying social exercise disguised as fun. You'll dance miniature waltzes, sip watered down lemonade, and recite polite conversation as if auditioning for adulthood. Every move is watched. Every giggle must be delicate, never wild. Children learn the performance of adulthood long before they understand it. But cracks show here too. Reformers begin to notice how grim this all is. Campaigners like Lord Shaftesbury push for child labour laws, limiting work hours and mandating schooling. It's slow, painfully slow, but it begins. Some parents even start reading the new parenting books that suggest affection won't actually ruin their children. Revolutionary stuff. By evening, you're back in the nursery. The fire's low, the shadow's long. Nurse reads from the Bible or a moral storybook about a boy who learns humility after stealing jam. You listen half asleep, half dreaming of a world where no one tells you to sit up straight, even in your dreams. The candle flickers, the room smells of soap and lavender oil, and the day ends as quietly as it began. You're tucked in, tight, because loose blankets look slovenly. Nurse hums something low, almost kind. You drift off, thinking of the world beyond this room. One where laughter doesn't need permission. And in that half-dream, you grow up just a little bit. You imagine being free, even though you've never really seen what that looks like. You're older now, grown, respectable, and cautious. And yet as you step into the fog, thickened streets of London, you feel the pulse of contradiction beating beneath the city's polished surface. The gas lamps flicker, a hansom cab rattles past. Somewhere, church bells toll the hour of decency, but down a nearby alley, laughter spills from a door that doesn't open for polite society. Welcome to Victorian public morality, built on sermons, shame, and secrets. You pull your cloak tighter, partly for warmth, partly to avoid notice. The city hums with double standards. Out here, virtue is currency. Appearances matter more than truth. Everyone you pass, ladies with parasols, clerks in bowler hats, constables twirling batons, plays their role in a moral pantomime written by a society terrified of its own desires. Every newspaper sermonizes about decency. The Illustrated London News warns readers against immodest fashions and improper entertainments. Pamphlets urge modesty in dress and thought. Even music hall songs are censored for too much suggestion. The Victorians adore moral purity, almost as much as they secretly adore violating it. A mainstream historical fact, in 1857, the Obscene Publications Act was passed, the first law in Britain to ban indecent literature. Its enforcer, Anthony Comstock, later bragged about destroying hundreds of thousands of immoral books and photographs. Of course, the demand for them only increased. Supply and shame became dance partners. The hypocrisy isn't subtle. You stroll past a church that preaches temperance, then past a pub full of respectable men sipping gin. For medicinal reasons. The same men who condemn fallen women, keep brothels in business, and the city, hungry, vast, anonymous, doesn't judge. It just swallows secrets and keeps moving. Fog curls around your ankles like smoke from a guilty conscience. You turn down a quieter lane and nearly collide with a woman in a shawl. Her hands are chapped, her eyes tired, but her lipstick bright. She smiles at you, a working girl surviving on society's silence. The same newspapers that condemn her also sell stories about her kind. Victorians can't stop peeking at what they publicly despise. Historians still argue whether this moral obsession made people better, or just more creative at hiding things. You hear talk in the street of moral reform societies. Middle-class matrons gather to rescue fallen women, often without asking whether those women want rescuing. Meanwhile, men's clubs flourish, places where respectability is checked at the door. One might say the Victorians invented the concept of the double life. Even architecture plays a part. Public buildings radiate grandeur and control. Libraries, museums, courthouses, while back alleys hide everything unspeakable. The gaslight itself becomes a metaphor, bright on the surface, shadowy underneath. A quirky tidbit. Some Victorians were so obsessed with public decency that they covered the legs of pianos with little skirts, lest someone get ideas. No one really knows whether this was widespread or just satirical exaggeration, but it fits the mood: repress first, laugh nervously later. As you continue walking, the clatter of hooves fades, replaced by murmurs from a nearby drawing room. Inside, a group of moral crusaders discuss the problem of vice. Their solution: regulate it. License prostitution, inspect women's bodies, and pretend the demand side doesn't exist. It's control masquerading as virtue. You sip imaginary tea and try not to choke. Across town, in smoky salons, artists and writers push back. They paint nudes under the banner of classical art. They write novels like Madame Bovary or Tess of the d'Urbervilles. Stories that scandalize the moralists but sell out instantly. The more Victorians ban, the more Victorians buy. Public decency dictates that women should never be alone with men. Yet the streets are filled with governesses, seamstresses, and widows walking to work, unescorted, unnoticed, and utterly necessary to the city's machinery. The rules bend quietly when Labour demands it. At Hyde Park on Sunday, you might see ladies in bonnets, nodding politely while preachers thunder about sin. They tut at the mention of temptation, pretending not to notice the pickpockets working the crowd. Morality, after all, is about performance, not consistency. But not all is bleak hypocrisy. You pause at a charity mission where volunteers hand out bread and blankets. Their intentions are sincere, their rules rigid. The Victorians, for all their contradictions, do believe in helping the poor, just as long as the poor behave properly while being helped. In the background, you hear the slow creak of progress. The newspapers start printing letters from readers questioning why women alone bear the blame for immorality. Clergymen debate temperance versus compassion. Some voices, quiet, trembling, begin to ask whether virtue can exist without honesty. As you walk, the fog thickens. You catch a glimpse of two lovers in an alley. Quick, furtive, human. You look away, pretending not to see, the way everyone else does. But you feel it. The tension between appearance and truth. The eternal Victorian balancing act. You reach the Thames. The water smells of coal and secrets. Barges slide by like dark thoughts. Somewhere upriver, a ball is in full swing, all chandeliers and champagne. Down here, a child shivers under a bridge. It's the same city, divided by etiquette and luck. You think about how many people must pretend every day just to survive. Pretend to be pure. Pretend to be loyal. Pretend to believe that rules keep the world from collapsing. Maybe they're right. Maybe pretending is the only thing holding everything together. But under all that pretense, you sense exhaustion. The Victorians work so hard at being proper that they forget to be happy. By the time you reach home, your shoes are soaked, your mind spinning. You hang your hat, light a lamp, and watch the shadows move across the wallpaper. You think about piano legs in skirts, about forbidden books hidden in drawers, about people trying to breathe through lace collars. The city outside hums with contradiction. Sin wrapped in sermon, freedom hiding behind fog. You sip your tea, wondering if anyone in this age truly believes in the rules they follow. The clock chimes. Midnight. The respectable hour for going to bed. And for everyone else, the hour when the real London wakes up. Morning again. But this time you're not in a parlour or nursery. You're in a cluttered study filled with ticking contraptions, glass jars, and the faint smell of formaldehyde. The world is changing around you, and for once, the change is louder than etiquette. Welcome to the age of invention, superstition, and everything in between. A place where science hums like an electrical wire, and seances buzz like after-dinner entertainment. You sit at a desk beside a flickering oil lamp, pages of notes spread before you. Outside, London clatters with industry. The railways stretch farther each year, the telegraph taps out invisible messages, and steamships race across oceans that once seemed endless. You can almost feel humanity rushing forward. And yet, in this same moment, people are summoning spirits in parlours, buying, magnetized, water to cure headaches, and fainting at lectures about evolution. Progress and panic hold hands. A mainstream historical fact. Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species was published in 1859, and it hit Victorian society like a cannonball through a tea set. People who'd grown up believing the world was 6,000 years old suddenly had to imagine that humanity crawled from mud and shared ancestors with monkeys. Some embraced the wonder of it, others declared it blasphemy. Churches trembled, and drawing rooms buzzed. Historians still argue whether Darwin's ideas freed people or frightened them. Some say it birthed a new age of reason. Others say it made Victorians cling harder to tradition, like corsets against chaos. But Darwin isn't the only revolutionary in town. Doctors are learning about germs. Before this, illness was blamed on bad air, miasma they called it. So, entire cities reeked of disinfectant, while surgeons went from patient to patient in bloody aprons, wondering why everyone kept dying. Then Joseph Lister introduced antiseptics in the 1860s, and survival rates skyrocketed. Science, at long last, began washing its hands. Still, you can't help laughing softly as you picture some of the miracle cures people trusted. Snake oil, electric belts, radium tonics, arsenic wafers for a glowing complexion. Yes, actual poison as beauty treatment. A quirky tidbit. Victorians even believed that sniffing crushed beetles could improve hearing. It didn't. It just made your house smell terrible. Every new discovery brings new anxiety. You hear of seances where people try to contact the dead through table, rapping, and ghostly knocks. Queen Victoria herself, mourning Prince Albert, attended spiritualist sittings hoping for a whisper from beyond. Mediums become celebrities, and skeptics chase them from town to town, testing their tricks with hidden wires and mirrors. But you understand the appeal. In an age obsessed with order, the supernatural offers chaos wrapped in candlelight, a comforting mystery. After all, science can explain so much, but not everything. Not grief. Not longing. Not love. You step outside into the chilly air, passing a lamplighter with a pole and flame. Overhead, smog thickens. The price of progress. Factories roar. Locomotives scream. And newspapers hail every new invention as civilization's next miracle. The Victorians truly believe they're conquering nature itself. Until cholera sweeps through the streets again, reminding everyone that nature bites back. Inside the British Museum, scholars classify bones and bugs with obsessive glee. You peer at a glass case labeled Homo neanderthalensis and feel the quiet thrill of realizing just how small you are in the story of time. But not everyone enjoys that feeling. Some call it progress, others call it heresy. Electricity crackles at the edge of everyday life. You visit an exhibition and see a man power a light bulb with a dynamo. It glows brighter than any candle. The crowd gasps. It's as if lightning itself has been tamed. You wonder what your grandparents would think. Maybe they'd faint. Maybe they'd call it witchcraft. Science lectures become a kind of theatre. Professors demonstrate chemical reactions that burst into flames, audiences applaud, and everyone leaves both enlightened and slightly singed. Victorian curiosity knows no limit, except, perhaps, common sense. Still, this is the same century where people believe in phrenology. The idea that the bumps on your skull reveal your personality. Imagine someone running their fingers over your head, declaring, this lump here shows poor self-control. Entire careers are built on that nonsense. And it sells. Oh, it sells. You stop at a bookstall and browse pamphlets. Electric healing and the future of man. How to converse with the departed. The truth about mesmerism. The Victorians are intoxicated by discovery, but equally enchanted by delusion. They want the universe to make sense, and if it won't, they'll invent one that does. Later that night, you find yourself at a parlor gathering, half social event, half séance. The air smells of wax and nervous perfume. A medium sits at the head of the table, hands poised above a polished planchette. The spirits, she whispers, wish to speak. The table trembles. Candles flicker. Someone gasps. You lean closer, trying not to laugh when you spot the faint thread tied around her wrist. But even as you smirk, you feel something shift in the room. The lights dim, the world quiets, and for a brief second, the rational and the irrational blur. You realize how deeply people need meaning, how desperately they want to believe that science and spirit might someday meet halfway. By midnight, you're back in your study, scribbling notes by lamplight. You think about Darwin, Lister, and the dreamers who chase ghosts. You think about how every discovery births a dozen new mysteries. Maybe progress isn't a straight line. It's a circle, endlessly looping between reason and wonder. Outside, thunder rolls, a reminder that nature is still boss. You smile, sip tepid tea, and adjust your spectacles like a proper Victorian scholar. Maybe you'll patent something tomorrow, or maybe you'll host a séance for fun. Because here, in this age of iron and illusion, you can believe in both evolution and ectoplasm. And somehow, no one bats an eye. You wake to the sound of gulls and the rhythmic creak of wood beneath your boots. The air tastes of salt and coal smoke. You're not in London anymore. You're somewhere off the coast of Empire, aboard a ship bound for a world painted pink on the maps back home. The Victorians have packed their manners, their teacups, and their unshakable sense of superiority, ready to civilize the planet one etiquette lesson at a time. You watch the sun rise over a deck lined with officers in crisp uniforms, sipping tea as if they're still in Surrey. Even out here, thousands of miles from home, the rules of conduct march beside them like invisible soldiers. To be British in the 19th century means believing that your way of sitting, speaking, and even breathing is inherently correct, and everyone else's is a fascinating mistake. A mainstream historical fact, by the 1870s, the British Empire covered nearly a quarter of the globe. The Victorians called it the empire on which the sun never sets. And, true to form, they brought along everything: railways, churches, cricket, and moral lectures. They also brought a staggering ability to mispronounce local names and declare it an improvement. Your ship anchors near a tropical port, perhaps India, perhaps Africa, perhaps the Caribbean, and the first thing the Victorians do is look for a decent place to have tea. Empire, after all, runs on tannin and sugar. You can almost hear a missionary sighing. The natives are restless, while he arranges his napkin just so. You disembark into heat, so thick it feels like breathing through velvet. The locals watch with polite confusion as you unfold parasols and fan yourself, as though etiquette could defeat humidity. The empire thrives on contradictions like this, talking about civilizing. People who've already built cities older than Rome, while insisting they learn how to queue properly. Historians still argue whether the empire was primarily about economics, ideology, or sheer arrogance. The truth, like the map, is messy. There were explorers who genuinely believed they were spreading knowledge. There were soldiers and merchants chasing profit. And there were administrators who saw control as a moral duty. The white man's burden, as Kipling called it. Though you can almost hear history groaning at the phrase. You visit a colonial governor's residence. Whitewashed walls, ceiling fans that barely move the air, and a staff of local servants, trained to serve with British precision. Every dinner begins with grace, ends with port, and unfolds like a theatre piece. Native dishes cautiously avoided, roast beef praised as the taste of home. Empire, it seems, tastes like boiled potatoes, even in paradise. A quirky tidbit. Some Victorians travelling abroad brought collapsible bathtubs made of canvas, so they could maintain their hygiene routines on safari. Nothing says conquest like taking afternoon baths in the middle of the jungle, while pretending not to notice the mosquitoes, plotting revolution. But there's another side to empire, the human one. You watch as local children stare at your clothes, your voice, your strangeness. Missionaries open schools teaching Shakespeare alongside scripture. Traders import tea, cotton, and opium with equal enthusiasm. The world becomes interconnected, but not equal. Every railway line is a vein carrying both progress and exploitation. You can feel the dissonance. The same people who preach virtue in London now preside over brutal systems abroad. Plantations, indentured labour, entire cultures bent to Victorian rules. Even here, propriety rules the dinner table while cruelty governs the field. You think of how these contradictions will echo for generations. Still, amid the empire's machinery, there are moments of wonder. You taste spices you've never imagined, see colours so vivid they make London seem grey. You meet people who teach you more about humanity in one conversation than any etiquette manual ever could. Some colonials begin to question their own right to rule, to wonder whether civilization might have more than one definition. The Victorians abroad live in a constant state of performance. They recreate English gardens in desert soil, import piano teachers to outposts where no one owns a piano, and insist on Sunday services in places where it's 110 degrees in the shade. They believe in order, even when it melts. You attend a colonial ball one night, ceiling fans turning lazily overhead. Ladies in satin gowns sip champagne, officers laugh too loudly, and a band plays a slightly off-tempo waltz. Outside, the jungle hums. You realize that this entire empire is a fragile illusion. A house of mirrors reflecting British self-image across the globe. And yet, something stirs. Local reformers begin writing, speaking, organizing. They learn the language of their rulers and use it to challenge the system. Newspapers in India, Jamaica, and South Africa start printing words like self, rule. Empires, after all, always plant the seeds of their own undoing. One evening, you sit with a missionary under a starlit sky. He insists he's saving souls. You ask him whether he's sure they needed saving. He pauses, unsure how to answer. The stars twinkle silently, indifferent to both sermons and empires. By the time you sail home months later, your luggage is full, spices, souvenirs, and a quiet unease. You've seen too much to believe in the old simplicity. The empire looks smaller now, even though the maps still show it stretching forever. As the white cliffs of Dover appear on the horizon, you take a deep breath of cold English air. It smells like coal, rain, and comfort. But somewhere inside, you carry the sound of distant drums, the taste of strange fruit, and the uneasy knowledge that civilization was never a one-way gift. The deckhand beside you hums a tune, something foreign, adapted, familiar yet not. The world, it seems, has started to hum back. You step off the gangplank back onto British soil, boots clicking against the cobblestones, slick with rain. London's air greets you like an old, smog-soaked friend, dense, grimy, and oddly comforting after the glare of empire. You feel changed, though. The tea tastes the same, but the world feels different beneath your gloves. The gas lamps flicker, the hansom cabs rattle by, and every gentleman you pass seems oblivious to the tremors beginning beneath the polished surface of Victorian order. You can almost hear the ticking of the century's clock. The year might be 1890 or thereabouts. The empire is vast, industry booming. Queen Victoria is nearing the end of her long reign, but cracks have begun to show in the wallpaper of perfection. The rich are richer, the poor are still poor, and everyone is talking about progress, while standing knee-deep in soot. You stroll through the city streets, noticing posters for lectures on Darwin's theory of evolution, advertisements for electric light installations, and pamphlets from suffragists demanding the vote. You realize you're walking through the end of one world and the uneasy birth of another, a mainstream historical fact by the late Victorian period. More than 75% of Britons lived in urban areas, a staggering shift from rural life just a century earlier. The Industrial Revolution had finished its great shuffle, and the cities were now the heartbeats of empire. But those hearts were irregular, thumping in both prosperity and pollution. As you walk through the East End, you catch a glimpse of children barefoot in puddles, women selling flowers with hollow eyes, and the glow of gin, palaces tempting weary workers. The middle classes still lecture about morality, but you can feel hypocrisy hanging like fog over the rooftops. In drawing rooms, gentlemen debate charity and improvement. Outside, poverty chews on the bones of the future. Historians still argue whether Victorian philanthropy was true compassion or just social performance. An elegant way to tidy up guilt while keeping the system intact. You imagine the great and good hosting fundraisers where champagne flows for the poor who'll never taste it. The more they moralize, the less they seem to notice the hungry. You wander past a new phenomenon, the department store. Its windows glimmer with fabrics, perfumes, parasols, objects that whisper of aspiration. The Victorians have discovered consumerism, and they're hooked. Shopping becomes both leisure and religion. You catch yourself smiling at the absurdity of a civilization that preaches thrift while inventing impulse buying. A quirky tidbit: some stores even provided rest rooms for respectable ladies so they could spend the entire day shopping without fear of indecency. Imagine inventing modern capitalism and the mall bathroom in the same decade. What a legacy. Night falls over London. You find yourself at a smoky music hall where comedians mock politicians and saucy singers test the edges of propriety. The audience roars, half drunk on beer and rebellion. You realize that humor is the city's release valve, a way to laugh at rules too rigid to bend. Even the Victorians needed to exhale. As the curtain falls, you head out into the mist. Somewhere, you hear the distant hiss of steam engines, the rumble of change. The empire still struts, but the world has grown skeptical. Colonial uprisings whisper from the edges of maps. At home, new voices are rising. Socialists, feminists, scientists, all questioning what progress really means. You visit a newspaper office, crowded and noisy, smelling of ink and ambition. Editors shout deadlines. Typesetters hammer rhythmically. The headlines shout of inventions, automobiles, telephones, X-rays, and scandals. The modern age is creeping in, and the Victorians can't decide whether to be thrilled or terrified. You read about the Jack the Ripper murders, grim reminders that beneath the surface of order, chaos still prowls. The papers sensationalize everything, proving that even horror can be entertainment if the story's juicy enough. It's a chilling reflection of the times, science and superstition coexisting like polite enemies. By now, electricity hums through the city. Streetlights glow with a cold, steady brilliance that gas lamps never managed. You pass an inventor testing a prototype of something called a moving picture. He claims one day people will sit in darkened rooms, and watch life itself flicker across a screen. You smile, thinking how Victorians would faint if they saw your smartphone. Still, the rules persist. Women may ride bicycles now, scandalously showing a glimpse of ankle, but heaven forbid they smoke in public. You see suffragettes marching with banners, heckled by men in top hats. They're told to be quiet, polite, ladylike. They smile tightly and keep marching anyway. You can almost feel the future inching forward, corset by corset. Historians still argue whether the late Victorian moral shift was genuine liberalization or simply exhaustion. A society so tired of pretending that it began to let its guard slip. Either way, you can sense the change. There's laughter in the streets again, and not just the nervous kind. You find yourself wandering toward a park where, under gaslight, young couples stroll unchaperoned. They talk of art, poetry, socialism, ideas that would have scandalized their grandparents. You think back to those rigid dinner tables, the lace gloves, the thousand-rule dance of manners. And now, here, the air smells of rain and rebellion. You stop by a cafe, something new and modern. The espresso machine hisses like a tiny steam engine. A man in a bowler hat is arguing about Nietzsche. A woman in spectacles reads Oscar Wilde aloud. You sip your coffee, thinking how civilization always circles back to conversation, to caffeine, to trying to sound clever after midnight. A waitress drops a spoon, and no one faints. That's progress too. As you walk home, the bells of St. Paul's toll softly across the river. London glows with electric promise. You realize you're standing on the edge of 2 centuries. One fading. The empire, the manners, the gaslight. All will soon dim, replaced by the chaos of modern life. But tonight, the city hums, alive, uncertain, impossibly awake. You glance into the dark glass of a shop window. Your reflection blurs in the drizzle. The top hat, the cravat, the careful posture. It all seems faintly ridiculous now. The world has changed, and so have you. For the first time, you breathe without thinking of etiquette. You exhale London's fog, the empire's weight, the century's sigh. And somewhere, behind the clouds, the 20th century begins to stir. You wake to the sound of rain against a window pane. Soft, steady, almost musical. London again, but quieter now. The year has slipped forward, Queen Victoria's gone, and the world she ruled is fading into sepia. You sit up, the air chill with the scent of coal smoke and wet cobblestones. Outside, an electric tram hums by, and you realize the impossible has happened. The Victorian age has ended, but its ghost still lives in every rule, every mannered phrase, every moral whisper. You stretch, feeling the stiffness of decades of decorum. It's strange, isn't it, to have lived inside a century so obsessed with propriety that it shaped even your heartbeat. You tie your cravat, or maybe your tie now. The fashion's changing, and head downstairs. The maid nods, less deferential than her predecessors. Even servants, it seems, have discovered the word rights. You step out into the drizzle. The city feels both ancient and brand new. The pavements are wider. Women stride past you in smart skirts and hats instead of trailing skirts. Men talk of socialism, psychology, art nouveau. You hear the word modern everywhere, as if saying it fast enough might erase the dust of the past. A mainstream historical fact in 1901, when Victoria died. People lined the streets for miles, mourning not just a monarch, but an entire mindset. The empire was at its peak, but cracks showed beneath the gilt. Industrial unrest simmered, colonies murmured, and the old certainties about class and gender were loosening like worn corset strings. Still, the manners linger. You attend one last grand dinner, the kind your grandparents would recognize. Chandeliers, silver cutlery, polite laughter over oysters. But now there's a phonograph playing waltzes instead of a string quartet. The host's daughter speaks openly about working for a newspaper. Someone mentions food without blushing. Progress and propriety dance an uneasy waltz under the candlelight. Historians still argue whether the Victorians truly changed by the turn of the century, or whether they simply rebranded their repression as refinement. Perhaps you think human beings never evolve as fast as their inventions. You walk home along the embankment, where the lamps flicker gold against the mist. The Thames moves like a great, slow thought beneath the bridges. You remember the London of your youth, the horse dung, the gaslight, the fog so thick it could swallow a man whole. Now, the smell of ozone mixes with coal. Progress again. You stop to watch a couple arguing gently under an umbrella. She laughs, he bows, both walk off arm in arm. Once upon a time, that public affection would have been scandalous. Now it's just Tuesday. Society's pulse has quickened, softened, blurred. A quirky tidbit in 1904, an etiquette book warned that motor cars, if not handled with restraint, may erode the dignity of society. Imagine that. Dignity, endangered by horsepower. You smile. Victorians would have fainted at the noise of a traffic jam. You wander through Bloomsbury, where new thinkers talk of equality, art, and emotional honesty. Things once whispered behind fans are now shouted in salons. You can almost feel the ghosts of the old rules watching, scandalized, as the next generation paints, writes, and loves without permission. But even as the modern world accelerates, the Victorian echo remains. You still check your posture in a window. You still thank the waiter twice. You still apologize when someone bumps into you. Old habits stitched into your bones. Civilization, after all, is just a collection of remembered performances. You stop by a small cafe near Russell Square. The air smells of coffee and ink. A young woman is sketching the passers-by. A journalist is reading the latest suffrage headlines. You sip your tea, the one thing that never changes, and realize that beneath all the rules, the corsets, the empire, and the inventions, the Victorians were simply people trying to impose order on a world they didn't fully understand. Maybe that's what everyone does. Maybe we all build little empires, of routine, of manners, of comfort, to keep the chaos out. The clock strikes midnight. You step outside, rain misting your face, and listen to the city breathe. Somewhere, a phonograph crackles to life. Somewhere else, a new century dreams of flight, of freedom, of breaking every rule ever written. You walk toward home, coat collar turned up, shoes splashing through puddles that reflect 1,000 tiny lights. The world feels lighter now, less scripted. The Victorian in you resists it, but only for a moment. Then you smile. Change, after all, is just another kind of etiquette, one where everyone eventually learns the steps. And as you turn the corner, you realize that despite everything, the hypocrisy, the hardship, the rigid morality, the Victorians left behind something remarkable, a blueprint for endurance. They believed in improvement, in progress, even when they misunderstood both. And that belief, however flawed, carried them, and you, into the modern age. You pause on your doorstep, listening to the rain hush the city. Somewhere behind those clouds, the stars are still burning, as they were when you first began this journey. Steady, indifferent, eternal. You take one last deep breath of London's damp air, and exhale centuries of etiquette, empire, and expectation. The lamps flicker. The rain softens. The city exhales with you. Wind, down 300 words. Now the night has folded around you, and the story slows its heartbeat. You can almost feel the edges of that world dimming, the lace curtains falling shut, the carriages turning to dust. The Victorians drift away into the mist, their footsteps fading down cobblestone streets lined with ghosts of gaslight. Breathe. The rules don't matter anymore. The corsets have loosened. The gloves are off. The empire has dissolved into memory. You're safe here, floating between centuries. Listen to the quiet hum of the city outside your window. Not the roar of steam or the rattle of carts, but the softer rhythm of time itself, still moving, still gentle. You picture yourself walking once more through that London fog, not hurried, not proper, just drifting. The lamps glow dimmer. The air cools. Every sound feels far away, as though you've stepped outside of history and into calm. Let the world of etiquette and empire dissolve like sugar in tea. Let the voices fade. The stern teachers, the clinking teacups, the lectures on morality. They were loud once, but they're whispers now. The story has finished its sentences, and you're just here, breathing, resting, unwound. So close your eyes. Let the gaslights go out one by one, until the only light left is the one behind your eyelids. Drift with the rain, the river, the quiet pulse of a world that no longer demands you stand up straight. You've survived the Victorians. That's more than most could say. Sleep well, traveller of time. Tomorrow will be modern.